I have the honor this morning of introducing Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith, who will then introduce our incredible panel of experts that will be speaking with you today. The Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith is a television personality, a journalist, a preacher and speaker, an author, a prison chaplain, a church executive, minister, pastor, wife, and mother. Yes, that's a mouthful right there. Currently, Walker-Smith serves as the executive director minister of the Church Federation of Greater Indianapolis, one of the oldest councils of churches in the world, founded in 1912. Yes. She is the first African American and first woman to serve in that position. Can I get an amen to that? Yeah. The Federation coordinates the work of denominations, congregations, and religious organizations, building bridges between these faith groups that enable them to better serve the community. She's regularly called on to speak, teach, and preach in this diverse setting of ministry, locally, nationally, and internationally. She serves on the governing body of the World Councils of Churches. She previously served as the co-chair of the World Council of Churches Decade to Overcome Violence, and that's when I first began working with Angelique, as well as served on the International Reference Group of the decade that planned the World Councils of Churches International Ecumenical Peace Convocation in Jamaica. She currently serves as the Vice Chair of Home Mission and Ecumenical Liaison with the National Baptist Convention USA, Incorporated. She has also been associated with Christian Churches Together, the American Bible Society, the National Councils of Churches in the USA, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and many other things. Her book, Faith in the City, was released just in 2012. We've asked Angelique this morning to facilitate this panel, and our panelist, who she will introduce shortly, will be reflecting on the different aspects of just peace that have been articulated over the past couple years by the World Councils of Churches that have come through the ecumenical call to just peace, which was an invitation issued to all of our member communions to begin to study the concepts of just peace, of the intersection of justice and peace, lifting it up as a potential paradigm that can bring us together ecumenically. Specifically today, they'll be looking at the different aspects that are lifted up in that document and in the what is the more recent statement that's in your packet, the statement on the way of just peace. And those are peace in the community, peace among the peoples, peace in the marketplace, and peace with the earth. These four areas, I think, provide profound opportunity and potential to unite our work together as a community. So let's welcome to the stage, Angelique.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, that almost sounded Baptist. Oh my, this is good. Of course, with this music and worship we've had this morning, I almost felt I was there. This is great. I love the energy and the spirit in this place. Are you enjoying this? I know I am. Can we just give a hand clap for the worship and the time we're having together in Christ? This is awesome. I just want to thank Michael and Doug. They worked so hard with all of the collaborators to make this event possible. Yes, I was a young adult when it was Impact back in the day, and it helped to shape who I am in terms of advocacy for Christ in the public space. So I am so happy as a full adult, right? I'm much older now. Anyway, to see that Impact's work is going forward through ecumenical advocacy days. Back in the day, it was linked to councils of churches like mine more directly. Now it's more of a grassroots movement, but it always was a grassroots movement. So just kudos to you for keeping that legacy alive, especially for our young adults. And I'm very happy, if you allow me the privilege, to have my daughter here. Woohoo! Asha Smith. We are so glad. They call her the ecumenical baby. Literally, I used to take her to World Council meetings back in the day, so people know her, and she doesn't even know them, poor soul. But it's such a delight to be able to pass on the baton to the next generation through people like my daughter and others, and all the other beautiful young people in the room. So thank you for the moment to share. My dear brothers and sisters, we are at a strategic place in the ecumenical movement. I'm one of those who've been on this journey for probably too long, but a long time, who was able to witness and be part of the evolution of the paper you have in your document. Also, as I just said, with Impact coming up now to Ecumenical Advocacy Days, and to know that you are at a very strategic place of the crossroads of the ecumenical agenda, that we have come really basically full circle since the beginnings of these ecumenical movements, particularly when I think of World Council of Churches, which was born during the time right after World War II. You know, World Council was conceptualized before World War I, based on the missionary movements and all of that. Some of you have all that history. But the idea of the ecumenical movement was born in the idea of peacemaking and justice, particularly after World War II. So we've kind of come full circle. You will want to take a look at the document that is in your packet. I'm so happy that staff agreed to put that resource before you. We are coming off of the heels of the 10th Assembly of the World Council of Churches in South Korea, in Busan, down by that lovely ocean area. It was just an amazing place to be. I had the honor of serving as the anchor for the TV work that was done there with the Korean broadcasting, and to really capture all the stories that were being shared during that time. And I can tell you that the stories related to this peace and justice movement are very key to the impact that we can make. That is to say, our task today, which that assembly lifted, which I think has been the case ecumenically over the many, many years, tells us what best practices might be going forward. And that's what we're going to have the opportunity to do during this panel. I am so honored to be with people who are making that kind of difference as we go back to how it is in the communities, in our nation, in our world, we lament together, how we find just peace in our communities, and how we as believers, through the eyes of faith and through the feeling and sense of hope, can go and say, this doesn't have to be just a situation of lament. It can be transformed into a moment of hope. It can be transformed into a new opportunity where just peace can reign and serve. Those are the kinds of stories you're going to hear today. And as we have this panel discussion, I want to invite you to reflect on your story. Reflect on where you are theologically and biblically relative to the platform that allows you to go forward. In your World Council of Churches document, you will find rubrics. And let me tell you, I was a part of this journey that landed us there. You know, when you work on these committees globally, it's a lot of work. And we were selected to really try to be the kind of reflection place globally with all these different people from around the world, different languages, different cultures. You know, you have to work through all of that so that you get to a new moment. Pray together, spirit is good. And figure out where are the common places where we can try to enter in to this whole idea of just peace. That was a formulation that World Council advanced as we moved to Jamaica for the International Ecumenical Peace Convocation. And in so doing, we came up with these rubrics. Please refer to the document now as I share with you as we reflect on the panel entry points, which we will start in a moment. You will find the first one there is about just peace in the community. Of course, just peace is kind of, you know, a few of us speak that really good Hebrew and that really good Greek, you know, and the Aramaic that Jesus spoke. Few of us do that. So we try to attempt to get there with the English translation with just peace. But really, we ought to be saying shalom. That's what we really ought to be saying, because that's really what shalom means in the Hebrew. So this is kind of an attempt at an English translation, I think, to help us get there, to remember that it's not just one side or the other, but there is this tapestry that was like created yesterday, which I think is beautiful, that really pulls us together to understand what it is Christ envisioned for us. So we begin with just peace in the community. All of us start somewhere in a neighborhood, in a place where we reside, or a place that we call home. Basically, that's what that first entering in piece is saying. Where do you enter in your home? Where are you? Where are you located? Where can you make a difference? Where your congregations are, where your networks are at your base. The next one is just peace with the earth. How do we treat this amazing gift God has given us in the creation? And so that's another place to, if you will, enter in. And then we go to the other side, which is just peace in the marketplace. We heard our preacher, Dr. Winkler, who's a colleague of mine, mention this morning about the marketplace and talking about scripture and how Jesus understood that even when he was there at the temple. I ask you to reflect more deeply on that as we talk about in the marketplace. What does it mean? This is the whole economic piece, the piece that's really sometimes the hardest piece to breaking down the economics of the situation, the structures of the situation. This is what we're saying about the marketplace. What does it mean, for example, to have minimum wage? That's what's the talking point now, right? Minimum wage. What is a good minimum working wage? Even health care, what does it mean for people to be able to be healthy, to be able to participate in the marketplace? Those kinds of entry points we're speaking of in the marketplace. And last, certainly not least, is also the matter of justice, just peace amongst the nations. Here we're talking about nation building and national identities and various cultural identities. Of course, so many of us wrestle with the ways in which nation states have been divided or identified. You know, the whole conversation now in Ukraine relative to Russia. I mean, people are debating, well, are they Russian or are they Ukrainian? You know, there's this whole issue about what is a nation state? What is it? What does it look like today? I look at Africa, where I've been very involved in advocacy work and have lived abroad in Africa, and I look at all the quote artificial markings of where certain nations begin and where certain nations end. In this country, we have an amazing network of people from all over the world. This country was built on the premise that we would be a faceted, beautiful tapestry of the world, but yet we marginalize and put forth groups here and there that are not at the center of who we are. Again, what does it mean to be a nation? What does it mean to have nation building? These are some of the points that we enter in that World Council has identified as rubrics to help us, but all with a biblical and theological mandate. I'm sorry to tell you, there is about this document, I think, is originally it was like about 50 pages. You don't have to deal with that today. But if you want that deeper dive, I really want to encourage you to go to the WCC website to learn more about all the theological and biblical pieces related to that. But now, worldwide, we're on this pilgrimage to just peace. And I want to invite you, as we think about our country, the United States of America, how it is we align with the global movement. We saw, and I see so many people from around the world in the room. It's so marvelous to be here in Washington in that way. But to be thinking about this pilgrimage, what does pilgrimage mean to you as we go on a pilgrimage to just peace? Enough from me and more from the guests that are coming. It is my joy now to introduce to you our wonderful panelists. I'm going to introduce them and then invite them to come have a seat as I introduce them. Would you please look into your booklet? And you will find that on page 13. I am not going to read all of this amazing background on all of these wonderful panelists. You get to do that. You probably already did that. You're ahead of me, I'm sure. But I'm going to just give you a little bit about who our wonderful guests are today. First and foremost, we invite Holly Maserani. She told me how to do this. Holly Maserani, and she's with Prince George's County Restorative Justice Program. Please welcome Holly to the stage. And then we're inviting up to the stage Alyssa Wilson. She's with the Public Education and Advocacy Coordinator for Africa at the American France Service Committee. Please welcome Alyssa. And it is also my joy to bring to the stage Herman Kamara, who is the convener of the National Fisheries Solidarity Movement from Sri Lanka and chair of the Praju Abhalasa. I was close. Please welcome Herman from Sri Lanka. And then we're going to bring to the platform the Reverend Dr. Michael James Alexa, pastor and professor. Please welcome Reverend Dr. Michael. their task today is to not only share the foundations for what their work is about and what they are doing, but also to share story, where they live, what they're doing to make a difference for just peace. As we remember the lament and the pilgrimage, what does it mean for them? So we're going to begin with Holly, and then we're just going to go right down the panel. Each will be given, oh, they already know, and I do television work. I do this. And when the camera stops, it really stops. So they've already know. We've had a pre-conference call, right, Doug? Where are you, Doug? Yeah, we did this conference call. They can go no longer than 15 minutes, so you can help me do. But they already know. We just want to make sure that everybody gets to participate because there will be a Q&A and time for clarifications at the end. So let's begin our conversation with Holly, and then we will go to Alyssa, and then Herman, and then Reverend Dr. Michael. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here. I'm going to situate myself at the podium for just a moment. So, I'm here to talk about the field of work that is restorative justice and how its philosophies and practices can contribute to peace in the community. It's probably late enough in the morning. We can start with some theory, right? Ready?
Yay, theory!
So, restorative justice is an alternative theory or philosophy about how to respond to crime. The aim is to make justice and the practice of justice an opportunity for healing and transformation. To make crime and conflict an opportunity for healing and transformation. So, instead of asking the questions, what rule has been broken and what is the punishment that is deserved, the questions become, who has been harmed? How have they been harmed? And what can be done to repair this harm and move forward in a way to prevent this from happening again? The idea is that when a crime occurs, it's not just a rule that's been broken, but relationships that have been broken, community that's been broken. As a movement, restorative justice began as a victims movement 30 years ago in Kitchener, Ontario. It was the first victim offender dialogue program. Now, to be totally transparent, this is nothing new to humankind. It is only new to the Western criminal justice system. People have been resolving things like this for millennia around fires. The most tried and true processes of restorative justice are those that involve an encounter. The processes you may have heard of are family group conferencing, community conferencing, victim offender dialogue, victim offender mediation, circles. The program that I am the director of in Prince George's County, Maryland, does community conferencing. And we offer community conferencing as a diversionary option for juvenile offenders. We receive cases from the Department of Juvenile Services and the state's attorney and schools and community. We're funded through the courts. We bring together everyone who's been involved in or affected by an incident of harm. So that includes the victim and the offender, and I use those terms loosely, sometimes less loosely. And also their respective communities of support, so family and church members and other community members of support to talk about what happened, how everyone's been affected, and what needs to happen to move forward to prevent this from happening again. If the group is able to come up with an agreement, and then that agreement is followed through, then the case isn't pursued any further, and justice sits in the hands of the community in that moment. So I want to share a story with you. I actually facilitated a conference last weekend that was, to me, really spoke to the miracle of the work that I'm blessed enough to be able to engage in. We had a case referred to us from the state's attorney's office that involved a first-degree assault stabbing in a home. It was a family incident. It sort of was a domestic dispute that turned ugly. Teenage boy ended up stabbing stepfather in the arm. So it wasn't a serious injury, but it was still considered a first-degree assault. We bring the family together. So we have mother, father, teenage boy, 2 younger siblings, and 2 grandmothers. It started out heated. It's not an easy situation to try to talk about. But throughout the conference, it came out that mom has lupus. Both parents are working full-time, trying to manage the hecticness that is life. Mom was taking public transportation to work every day and back, and suffering from lupus. And really, grandmother said, the person who's really suffering here is mother. She's sitting between the 2 of you. So if you just reflect for a moment on what would have happened to this teenage boy if he'd gone in front of a judge. And now I'll tell you what the agreement was that came out of that community conference. Teenage boy will watch younger siblings while mom and dad go on dates. When I asked teenage boy what needs to happen to make the situation better, he said, communication. So the family's going to get therapy. Teenage boy and father agree to spend time working on their relationship and spend more time together one-on-one, starting March 23rd. I hope that's happening right now. Grandma says her door is always open when teenage boy needs a break and needs to talk. 7-year-old boy agrees to start cleaning the living room. 12-year-old girl agrees to clean the kitchen. Teenage boy agrees to clean the bathroom. All 3 of them agree to clean up after themselves with more regularity. And there were apologies as well. Oh, sure. Sorry, I have that problem. When I speak from my heart, I get really quiet. So this is an anecdote, and it is one of the reasons why I believe that having faith in the ability of individuals and communities to resolve their own conflicts can contribute to the greater peace of our society. As well-meaning as our justice system is, it does often more harm than good. If you're interested in finding out more about programs like this, restorative justice programs are happening all over the country, all over the world, in various modalities, and I'm more than happy to talk about that, maybe in the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm going to try to adjust this. I saw some people struggling earlier today. Got a little nervous while I was watching you. Okay, so first I would like to say how honored I am to be here this weekend with all of you and with all the fabulous people who have been speaking and leading workshops. It's really quite humbling. So as was said, I'm the American Friends Service Committee, and I generally focus on Africa, Africa policy, and peace building. And I'm here to talk a little bit about our slice of peace among the peoples. I have a little bit of an ambitious agenda for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our peace building work in Somalia and how it informs our work to help to break down the legal barriers that some US legislation has put up to peace building work around the world. Then I want to tell you a little bit about a new framework called shared security. And finally, I want to make some simple suggestions about what you can do when you leave, right? So first, let's start in Somalia. As most of you know, Somalia is a country in the Horn of Africa that has been struggling with conflict since the early 1990s. What we hear in the US about Somalia is generally about a war-torn country, clans fighting clans, and pirates. Yeah, that Tom Hanks movie. We were not very happy about that. And I'm not very happy about it because what AFSC sees is a different story. It's a story where people are making decisions about their future and they're coming together across lines of age and gender to strengthen their communities. a story where young people who, when given a choice between violence and development, engage in programs that help them to improve their lives and the future of their communities. So I want you to do something for me. You can close your eyes if it helps. I want you to imagine that you are a teenager in a relatively calm part of Somalia, right? Because not all parts of Somalia are all war all the time. Your parents can't afford to send you to school, and they're struggling with money. Now, you want to support them, right, because you're part of your family, and one day you want to have your own family. So there are not a lot of job opportunities, but you know that you could travel to a different part of Somalia and make $100 a month. And $100 a month is going to make a big difference in the life of those that you love. The catch is that you have to join an armed group. Maybe it's Al-Shabaab, and maybe it's a militia of a local warlord. What do you do? What do you do for your future, right? I just want you to think about that for a second. And we all might want to say, we do the peaceful thing, right? Okay. That's what we hope that is where we are living. But what do you do when those are really your options? So today, in our imaginary story, we're going to have a happy ending, right? Because in America, at the end of the movie, it's always a happy ending. So you join a program that offers training on trades and services that your community needs, and it also gives you conflict resolution and community development tools. You make as much money as you would if you were going to fight, but now you have the resources to help your community when conflicts arise and problems need to be addressed. Right? That's the way we want that story to end every time. So this type of youth work is important to building peace because young people make up the majority of fighters in Somalia. And AFSC and other organizations recognize that for a lot of young people, joining armed groups is not about ideology. It's about feeding their family. And we and others have successfully implemented peace-building programs with Somali partners, whether it's those that are married to economic development projects like I just described, or those that are grounded in civic engagement and youth facilitating experiences for other youth. These things are working. But sometimes when I talk about peace building in Somalia, people are surprised that it's even going on. And part of the problem is that there are not enough of these programs, right? There aren't enough of these programs. Most of the money that gets spent in the US and really around the world is spent on military tools. Right? And there are actually legal barriers to doing this work. US counterterrorism legislation, I'm getting a little wonky, I do work here in DC, has had unintended consequences for peace building. For example, it's illegal for a US organization to give a peace building training to people who are part of a group on a terrorist watch list, right? Anywhere in the world. So we're not just talking about Somalia. Wherever your passions lie, if it's Latin America with Colombia, if it's Israel, Palestine, wherever you are, if there is a terrorist watch listed group, to work with them is illegal, right? So just sit with that for a second. So this includes training for young people, like I said, who join one of these groups, but might want to change the way they're living their life. Now there are licenses that you can get as an organization to do that work. But the licensing process can take a long time, and really there is no requirement for the licensing office to ever reply to your request. And we know, because we've talked to them, they are swamped with, applications. But really, should you have to apply to the US government to get a license to do peace building work? We don't really think so. So AFSC, in our work on peace building, and I was led to this especially through my work on Somalia and advocacy, my work also includes supporting legislation like the Humanitarian Assistance Facilitation Act, which would exempt part of peace-building activities, as well as humanitarian activities, from some of the counterterrorism laws. Now, it wouldn't fix everything, right? But even this first step, took 2 years to get introduced to Congress. And it's still going to be a pretty heavy lift to get it passed. Yeah? So just know, because most people don't even know. I went to work in South Sudan. I worked for AFSC, then I went to work in South Sudan. I came back and I was like, wait, what's going on? This is a law that we have as a country? This is ridiculous. My own personal editorialization. But in a larger sense, right, we know that things like this act are just technical changes, right? That is just a technical change. And what we really need to do is to change the US view of the world, right? Because this view is categorizing human beings into good guys and bad guys, right? And bad guys suggests that people need to be killed or punished to create peace. Yeah? And working in this way does not address any of the root causes of conflict. It does not promote local processes to meet the underlying needs that drive people to participate in conflict, like that example that I gave in Somalia. But unfortunately, in DC, the dominant national security paradigm is geared toward this way of thinking. You identify and you destroy the enemy. The Pentagon's annual budget is 20 times larger than the combined budgets of the State Department, the US Agency for International Development, and US contributions to all international organizations. US military spending accounts for nearly half of all global military expenditures, far exceeding the spending of all potential US adversaries combined. Our foreign policy investments are geared toward a militarized relationship with the rest of the world. So as AFSC, we watched the Obama administration take office, and we saw that they were hiring a lot of the people who were leaders in peace building. We thought, oh, this is good. But once they were in government, they seemed to take a lot of the same actions or similar actions to those who were their predecessors. And it was like, well, what's going on here? And really, though, when you looked at the second level, they had the same tools, they were working with the same investments and the same framework that had been there, sort of for the long haul. So AFSC, working with our colleagues and friends at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, responded to this dynamic that we were seeing by developing an alternative frame that was rooted in faith and could help to change the narrative on war and violence. It could offer a more humane and effective approach and tools to ensuring security. And this framework, called shared security, it trades in the militarized and fear-based foundations of current policies for policies that support local communities in non-violently addressing the problems that they face. It also explains the need for flexible and responsive support at regional and global levels and a more effective system of international law. It has 4 key principles: peaceful ends through peaceful means, peaceful means, planetary imperative, got a little nervous, global coordination and cooperation, the rule of law, and restorative approaches to heal a broken world. And these recommendations are kind of rooted in 100 years of working in intractable conflicts around the world. Right? And it's not just, I should say, Friends and the larger ecumenical community that sees these changes as necessary. Both military and civilian policymakers have been coming out with statements that recognize the declining usefulness of the use of force, right? So I encourage you to take a look at shared security. There's some in the back. And I saw some people with one already. Just like as you think about what framework you would like the US to be reflecting in foreign policy. Okay, so we were asked to give maybe some recommendations, and I was like making my little notes. Support HAFA, I need you to do that. That's part of my recommendation, but no. I say that in jest. Really, I thought about these 4 rules. There's 4 rules to life that were sent around like 10 years ago. And later on, I found out they were based in the work of an anthropologist called Angeles Ariane. Show up, pay attention, do the best you can, and don't get attached to the outcome. And I feel like you can apply these rules to anything, right? When I was working in South Sudan, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. Those were the 4 rules that I turned to. How do we get this done? So in this particular setting where we're talking about peace among the peoples, right? Show up. Show up to think, engage, and discuss these issues, right? In terms of what resonates with you, whether that's peace building in Somalia, nuclear weapons, gun violence. So you can acknowledge the weight of these issues, but don't say that they are too big. And it starts with coming to things like EAD and bringing issues home to discuss in your own communities. Number 2, pay attention. Pay attention to what you are led to do through your highest sense of right, your spirituality, your pragmatism. And also, please, pay attention by getting informed, right? Because well-intended activity devoid of research can actually do more harm than good. And remember that you're never entering an empty field. You need to talk and listen to the people who are already doing work on the things that you are interested in. You talk to people that you agree with and talk to people that you disagree with. And you listen with an open heart and a critical thinking ear, right? Because that's how you're going to get something done. But most importantly, when you're talking about these issues, and you are talking about something that is happening outside of your community, you need to talk to the people whose community it's happening in. That is the number one voice to listen to. And it sounds super easy when we are sitting here all together conceptually. But when you are in that meeting, or you are, you've taken that plane ticket and you've gone to that other place, you've really got to make sure you sit back and listen, because I tell you, it happens all the time that people, they're just so excited that they end up really speaking more than they are listening. Yeah, you talk and listen. I know, do everything really. So show up, pay attention. Now we're gonna do the best we can. After we've gotten there, we've done all this research, we've talked to these people, we've got a concept of what we want to do. No paralysis because of analysis. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You have got to start somewhere. And once you have your plan and once you take your first steps, you can walk in that path of peace, and it won't be easy, and you will have to keep, reevaluating what you're doing, but you've got to start somewhere. And number 4, which is the hardest part, is not to get attached to the outcome. Often when you feel led through a deep longing for peace, it is hard not to be attached. But to be dedicated is not the same as to be attached. You must be willing to ask yourself hard questions about your work, the work that you've started, to take feedback and to change what needs to change, right? Sometimes you need to stick with the path you're in, but that needs to come through, information, analysis, and meditation. Okay, that's basically all I have to say. But the one thing I want you to do right now is to think of something that you're going to do after today. So if you're like a seasoned professional at your Peace Among the People's slice, maybe it's something on your to-do list that you haven't been getting done. If you're new to these concepts, maybe it's something that you want to start doing. So I want you to think about them. Just give you a little time to think about it. One thing. Now I want you to turn to your neighbor, one of your neighbors, and I want you to tell them that one thing that you're going to do. And I want you to give them a rough, I'm going to do that next week, or I'm going to do that within the next 3 months. So turn to your neighbor right now and do that. Okay, and make sure both people get to say it.
Good exercise.
It's a good exercise. Yes.
All right, are we good?
You can't cut
Are we good?
quiet now, though. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. If you can hear me, clap 4 times. If you can hear me, please be quiet. Yeah, that's from the Peace Learning Center, Indianapolis, Indiana.
Yeah.
That's right. And other places. Oh, this, okay, awesome. I love you, but please be quiet. Yeah, because I don't want to run over time. I know, I got serious people. So you probably won't remember anything that I've said to you this morning. And that's okay, that's all right, that's all right. But hopefully what you will remember is that some weird lady had you turn to your neighbor and say something that you wanted to do. And I hope that you actually do that thing. Thank you.
Good morning once more.
Good morning.
I come from Alaska, the largest state in our union, but among the least populated. And I come to tell you a story, a real David and Goliath story, about native people in the western part of Alaska, principally the Yupik Eskimo people and the Dena'ina Athabaskan Indians, who live in a burrow. Well, I don't have a map of Alaska, but you can all make your own. If you make a fist and stick your little finger out, they live on that little finger. And that finger is almost 800 miles long, but there are only 2,000 people living in that region in 17 scattered villages with no roads connecting any of them. These are among the poorest people in the United States. The Yupik Eskimos in the 1970s, when the war on poverty began were assessed as being at the very bottom, the very poorest people in North America. In most of those 17 villages, there are no grocery stores. You couldn't buy groceries if you had money because there's nothing there to buy. Everyone depends on what they can hunt and fish and gather to feed their families. So that's the David in my story. The Goliath is the Pebble Limited Partnership, a gold mining consortium based in Great Britain and Canada, which threatened to open the world's largest open pit gold and copper mine in the world, at the headwaters of the world's largest wild salmon fishery. You get the idea already, don't you? They have billions of dollars on their side. Our people have nothing but the fish that sustained them and have sustained them for 8,000 to 10,000 years. Our church, the Orthodox Church in America, began on Kodiak Island in 1794, but by 50 years later, in 1826, we already had missionaries in this area. This area is kind of solidly our religious territory. These are our people. And most of our clergy in the Diocese of Alaska are, in fact, Yupik Eskimos. So we have the people themselves on one side with no resources, no political savvy, no idea of how to deal with this huge international corporation, this gold mine. And on the other side, a corporation that threatens to take the 1% of the rock that really is gold or copper and treat it with cyanide, and then put the 99+% of the rock, which will be poisonous and pulverized into dust, into what are called, euphemistically I think, mixing ponds. The mixing pond in this case will be 10 to 20 miles long and deep. It will include 10 billion pounds of waste. That is the equivalent of 3,000 pounds of dirt, of poisoned dirt, for every human being on the planet. That's the size of this project. And we have less than 2,000 Indian and Eskimo people standing there in opposition to it. Well, what can we do? In the year 2010, our diocese brought this to the assembly, the clergy and the laity gathered in Alaska, in Anchorage, and we proposed this resolution, which passed unanimously. Among us, it was a no-brainer. Whereas according to the traditions and teachings of the Alaska Native peoples, the earth and the whole creation have always been perceived and experienced as filled with the sacred presence of life. And whereas historically the Alaska Native peoples have approached all living things and life-sustaining elements with reverence and respect. And whereas in the sacred scripture of the church, the creation of the world began with the Spirit of God moving on the face of the deep. And whereas God so loved the entire cosmos, meaning the whole creation, that he sent his Son into the world to bless, renew, and sanctify it. And whereas at the beginning of his earthly ministry, our Lord Jesus Christ first came to the waters of the Jordan. And whereas at the time of his baptism, the Holy Trinity was revealed, as the voice of the Father spoke from heaven, and the Holy Spirit descended upon the waters in the form of a dove to renew the creation. And whereas in commemoration of the baptism of our Lord each year, the church celebrates the great blessing of water at lakes, streams, and on the coasts of the seas and oceans. And whereas in the sacramental and liturgical life of the church, the great blessing of water is the normal and regular feature of every baptism. And whereas the parishes of the Orthodox Diocese founded in Kodiak in 1794 have been conducting this rite of blessing and sanctification on the waters for more than 200 years in Alaska, and whereas it is therefore the belief and sacred tradition of the Alaskan Orthodox faithful that the lakes, rivers, streams, and oceans are sacred to us, and whereas that which is sacred must be treated with utmost respect, care, and reverence, and guarded from any danger of defilement, desecration, or pollution, be it resolved that the church in Alaska calls upon all appropriate state and federal agencies to reject any so-called commercial development that in any way threatens the viability, purity, and sanctity of the natural world, especially the lakes and rivers which we hold sacred by both God's original blessing and the continued invocation of the Holy Spirit to bless and sanctify the rivers and lakes along which our communities have been established for thousands of years, be it further resolved that the Orthodox Church in Alaska welcomes and invokes God's blessing upon all those who would bring economic development to our communities, provided they can prove by successful and continuing operation elsewhere on the planet that they can conduct such activities without potential or significant harm to the natural environment.
Wow.
This passed unanimously in the year 2010, and we asked all the other Christian denominations in Alaska to join us, and not one did. And the reason was that at that time, politically, only 3% of the people in Alaska were opposed to the mine. Politically, it was too hot a potato. So what to do next? Well, at that time, we didn't have a resident bishop in our state. The man who was in charge of administering the Diocese of Alaska was the Orthodox bishop living in San Francisco. He had been a priest in Alaska for 4 or 5 years, so he was familiar with our situation. I said to him, Your Grace, would you consider coming to Alaska next winter? It's the 12th day of Christmas, so it's January on our calendar. Would you come and perform? We do it anyway, but if you came as the bishop and performed the ceremony, the great blessing of water, it would be a kind of public statement to reaffirm and make people aware of our resolution. He said, of course, fine. Of course, these are very poor communities. They cannot afford to hire a plane to bring the bishop from place to place. It would cost thousands of dollars. But the Renewable Resources Foundation, and please remember that name, the Renewable Resources Foundation, they've been struggling since the year 2006 and raised millions of dollars, not just on behalf of the native people of Alaska, but also for the fishing lodges, the tourists. I mean, there's not just the indigenous people who are opposed to the mine. Frankly, in my opinion, anybody in their right mind would be opposed to the mine. But they've raised millions of dollars and spent broadcast on radio and TV in the last 8 years over 250,000 radio and TV advertisements in our state, bringing the people of Alaska to a consciousness of what is at stake here with the mine. And they came to me and they said, how can we work together? I said, you got an airplane? They said, we've got 7, why? I said, well, just give us 1 and a pilot, and we will invite the bishop from San Francisco to come into this region where there are no roads and fly him from village to village to village for about a week. And we will perform what we've been doing for 200 years already, but with the bishop, in a sense, making a statement to reaffirm our resolution on the Pebble Mine. They said, fine, done. So about 2 weeks before this was to happen, I emailed the bishop. Now, Your Grace, this is logistically a rather, complicated process. There are no taxis or buses or, in many villages, even cars. So we have to alert the people there exactly pretty much when you're coming, give or take an hour, not a day, right? Because someone's going to have to come to the airport and fetch you and bring you to the town, which is several miles. Then the people of the village will be waiting in the church for you, and we will go in procession down to the river or the lake. And then someone has to go there ahead of you to cut a hole in the ice and keep it open from refreezing. And he wrote back, hole in the ice. Well, we had a professional videographer volunteer to come to several of the villages, and that's the video I'm going to show you now for the next 5 minutes. So I'll stand down and I'll take you to Iliamna Lake, a lake the size of the state of Connecticut, which is on the shores of the proposed Pebble gold mine. So if we can run that video, that DVD right now, I'll step down.
Clean water is sacred, it's given to us by God, and it is essential for life.
Our communion with God in this world depends on the world itself being clean and pure and held in sacred trust.
For thou art our God, who through water and the Spirit hast renewed our nature, grown old through sin. Thou art our God, who with water didst drown sin in the days of Noah. Thou art our God, who by the sea, through Moses didst free from slavery to Pharaoh the Hebrew race.
In sanctifying the waters, we're sanctifying one of the most basic elements for life in the universe. As far as we know, there is no life without water. And at this time, when part of my flock is threatened by the proposed building of the Pebble Mine, we've come out here to remind them and remind others of how important the water is for their survival.
We are here in southwestern Alaska to make a statement of solidarity with the Native Alaskan people here, that the Church, that God, we believe, affirms their inherent right to live in this region as they have for more than 10,000 years.
Do thou thyself, O Master, sanctify even now this water by thy Holy Spirit. Do thou thyself, O Master, sanctify even now this water by thy Holy Spirit. Do thou thyself, O Master, sanctify even now this water by thy Holy Spirit. Grant unto all who touch it, anoint themselves therewith and partake thereof sanctification, blessing, cleansing, and health.
And called thee his beloved Son, and the Spirit, in the form of a dove, confirm the truthfulness of his word. O Christ, our God, who hast revealed thyself, and hast enlightened the world, glory to thee. When thou, O Lord, wast baptized in the Jordan.
There are sins against human beings, but there are also sins against nature. There are human actions that should not be undertaken because they will defile or desecrate the land itself, which is held in sacred trust from one generation to the next.
We want to remind the people here that their choices that they make today are going to affect their children and their children's children, and a way of life and culture that's been here in Alaska for 10,000 years.
Sviati Bože, sviati
in January of 2010. In 2011, there was a referendum in that rather large but underpopulated borough, whether or not to allow the mine, basically. It couldn't be on that kind of stark or blatant basis. What the borough did was they passed a resolution saying that no earthen dams higher than 20 feet would be allowed. The Pebble project would require, to hold back that 10-mile-long mixing pond, would require earthen dams of 200 feet. And we thought that the people in the borough would have, in a sense, the first voice on whether or not the mine should be allowed, permitted. But it turns out that 2 days ago, the Superior Court in the state of Alaska overturned that referendum. So one step forward, two steps back. On the other hand, the Great Blessing of Water was, well, this tape has been well received across our state. Other churches are joining us now. And just last week, the new Orthodox Bishop of Alaska, Father Bishop David, and the Lutheran Bishop of Alaska came to D.C. to lobby with our senator and the EPA. The SOS, the Save Our Salmon Initiative of 2012, was adamantly opposed by the mine, of course. They claim to be in favor of pure water, and they claim that they're going to be able to run the mine without any danger to the aquifer. But they spent $15 million opposing that referendum. The Renewable Resources Coalition spent $5 million. But we won anyway. In 2013, a delegation came from the Orthodox Church of Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and their delegation issued a declaration supporting us and calling him on the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew I in Constantinople, who you might know is known in Europe as the Green Patriarch. He takes groups of scientists and religious leaders of all traditions on boat cruises. I don't know where he gets the boat, but he gets Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, shamans. He gets leaders of all faith communities on board a ship so they can't escape very far. With scientists who are working on ecological issues in that particular area. And they've gone up the Nile and down the Mississippi and across the Baltic. And he forces these people, who usually don't even talk to each other, to look at the landscape and deal with usually an ecological disaster that has already occurred. In the case of Alaska, we could be preemptive. We could look at something and say, now, before we mess this up, let's do something about it. And so the next phase may be Renewable Resources will loan us their jet. And we hope to, it's not for sure, but we will certainly invite His Holiness the Ecumenical Patriarch from Constantinople, Istanbul, to come and bless our water, probably not in the winter. Now, there's been enough negative publicity. National Geographic had an article on the Pebble Mine some Decembers ago. Enough media attention now, with 250,000 internal Alaskan media events and conferences, that the Pebble Partnership has dissolved. The Anglo-American, the British partner, which is by far the larger of the two, they're the second largest mining company in the world, pulled out of the project in September 2013. Leaving only the Canadian partner, Northern Dynasty, which has no other project but Pebble, alone in the project. Anglo-American had already spent $541 million on the project, and they walked away from it. Tiffany's, certainly a large gold producer or user consumer in New York, put out a full-page ad last week saying they will never take an ounce of Pebble gold. And finally, on March 3rd of this year, at the invitation of the native groups of Alaska primarily, but also those fishing and tourism agencies, they came to Alaska about a year ago and began doing an assessment of the environmental impact, the potential impact of the mine. And citing the Clean Water Act, On March 3rd, they issued their preliminary statement saying there was probably no way for this mine to go forward. The Anchorage Daily News, which has supported the mine for the last 7 years, on that day wrote an editorial about the EPA entitled, "Right Call." So they have completely changed their position 180 degrees. And they say, let's be clear, the EPA is just doing its job. Why have a Clean Water Act at all if not to protect a pristine natural watershed from potentially toxic industrial development? I think that says it all. So finally, I would say, the Pebble project is called Pebble to make it sound like it's really small, when it's one of the biggest natural disasters waiting to happen. And I would say, what we did was simply to pray with a liturgical act and invoke God's blessing on the place. And that was the spiritual pebble that brought down Goliath. As you meet with your representatives in Congress, compliment the EPA for doing its job. The only thing that this editorial says that the Pebble Mine can now do is bash the EPA. So they need as many positive strokes, compliments, and words of support as we can give them, because that will make all the difference when they issue their final report sometime this year. There is hope. Thank you.
All right, you get to do it again. Let's give a hand for all four of these amazing presenters. Wow, what a blessing. Weren't you glad you were here this morning? I mean, really, can you feel this? I can. Bringing down Goliath. I'm sorry, that just feels real good to me. And in each case, that is really kind of the bottom line, bringing down Goliath. I mean, David is so busy. I mean, and here we have some of them on the table, right? David and Esther's. Yeah, right. We got to do this, right? But really, this is so amazing. Isn't this inspirational for what it is that you are doing? I mean, the mixture of prayer and devotional, spiritual life, wedded with real people and real places where God is working and we are his agents of his grace. We just really just thank the Lord for these wonderful friends who are working and for all of what you're doing. The bad news is we don't have time to tell all your stories and the learnings. However, we are going to open up the floor for about 30 minutes here for you to get questions or clarifications. Okay, I'm sorry. I get to be the taskmaster or mistress this morning, and I really need you to do this in 30 seconds or less, so everybody can have a chance. There's a lot of people in this room, right? So I really need you to help me here so we can get everybody in as much as possible. Happy news. There are 2 more days left, well, 1.5 really, that are left to this conference. And I think you will be around. Will some of you be around today or tomorrow? Today. So Alyssa will be here today. How about anyone else? Will you be here? Okay, Holly is leaving, but the rest of you will be available. So find them at coffee, find them at the bank, or whatever, and talk further. Okay, it's your turn. Who would like to ask a question or any kind of clarification, and then we will referee here.
Please stand up.
And do speak loudly so all can hear.
Yeah. This question is for Holly. You told us what happened to this young man. There is a restorative justice in West Des Moines, Iowa. What I would like you to tell the group is what would have happened to the young man if it had not been for the restorative justice.
Wow. Alyssa, pass the mic. Thank you.
The case actually came to us out of the courtroom. The state's attorney requested that it be diverted. So it's placed on the STET docket, and that means that they basically have a year to sort of meet certain requirements. The requirement was to participate in a community conference. I'm not sure what the judge would have done otherwise, honestly. I believe he probably would have, he might have gone into detention, honestly.
Thank you. Got hands everywhere. Good luck, Michael. Right front here.
Yeah, this is also for Holly. Hi. What are some of the things that you see keeping restorative justice from being used more overall in this country, and I would say even particularly in DC?
I think there's a real sense of demonization of people who commit harm and what it means for our society and what the appropriate response is. I believe it's deeply, deeply cultural in terms of the way that we define justice to mean retribution. I think it really becomes a culture shift fundamentally that we all can undertake in terms of the way that we reconceive what justice means. And it, of course, becomes politicized as well, and that's where these policies come in. There's historical precedence for this philosophy, of course, and that's created our legal system. But then there's politics as well, which reinforces it. I think that politicians are awfully frightened of being considered soft on crime. So those are some of the reasons that come to mind.
Thanks. Over here.
This question is mostly for Alyssa, but for any of you, but probably with Alyssa with your work. For us tomorrow, who are the colleagues on the Hill, both on the Senate side and the House side, who are in sync with what you've all been sharing in terms of moving money from things that do harm to all the wonderful things that your programs do? So who are the ones that we should pat on the back and say thank you? There are particular men and women on the Hill who will be visiting who need to hear a thank you.
So I haven't been working quite as much on moving the money, but I know in appropriations, Nita Lowy, who does state and foreign operations, which helps with the State Department and USAID, has been good in our issues and should be thanked so that she continues to represent us well. In terms of the bill that I was talking about, it's actually, it was introduced by Chris Smith, who's a Republican from New Jersey in the House of Representatives, and co-sponsored by James McGovern from Massachusetts, Fortenberry from Nebraska, and Randy Weber from Texas. So you can also thank them because we need them to push harder on this. And I should also add, we need to make sure that the peace-building provisions are protected because most people identify this as a humanitarian assistance bill, but the peace-building community has been working really hard to make sure that those peace-building provisions got in there and stay in there.
Thanks.
It's the Humanitarian Assistance Facilitation Act, H.R. 3526.
Thank you.
Thank
back
you.
Here, I'm sorry, back
Thank
in the
you.
back.
Thank you to all four of you. It's just blown me away, though I know that the Holy Spirit's working. Specifically to Bishop Oleska, I am having a growing concern about water rights. Let me just take a 2-minute segment. T. Boone Pickens in Texas is buying up all the water rights underneath our land. In fact, there's a Latino engineer that I know in Manassas, Virginia, who was approached by a major corporation because he's bilingual, offering him a 6-figure salary to go to Latin America and Central America to buy up water rights. So not only am I concerned about the integrity of water, I'm now concerned about the rights underneath the land. Are you looking at that in Alaska? And maybe every one of us could be looking at that also. Where is that concern hitting you in Alaska? And that would be in Sri Lanka and actually for everybody, because, you know, without water, we're dead. And I think it's happening worldwide, and I think corporations are going bananas on this, and I think we better start watching our tails.
The Alaskan situation is probably different because a lot of the water in front of our villages is actually owned by the native Alaskans. And that's because in 1867, when Alaska was purchased from the Russian Empire, the treaty said the land belonged to the indigenous people who used and occupied it, and they would be subject to whatever laws Congress might enact. Congress didn't get around to enacting anything till 1971, 104 years later. But when they did, they had to acknowledge that the Native people actually owned the whole state, and then had to buy 90% of it that the Native people were willing to sell for about $1 billion, and award title, which solves the problem that they're still facing in Sri Lanka. They actually gave the Native people title to the 10% or so of the state that they refused to sell. So the water is our water, and it's not likely our people are going to sell any. The rest of it, the internal waterways, are under federal jurisdiction, and the federal government pretty much owns and occupies that now because they just bought it from us. So the water rights there seem not to be nearly as vulnerable to private investment as other places.
The problem is all these laws are being changed and they're being sublet into other bills. I mean, I'm just stunned at how much is happening in the world that we don't know about.
Does anyone else have some water rights?
Anyone else on the
Anything else
panel?
about the water?
Doing water rights?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, Michael's in the middle here.
I have another question, another Alaska question. Great story, and similar story in El Salvador when it comes to their work against gold mining. And I'm wondering, is there an international movement around this gold mining, this mining technique in general? So we're not having Tiffany's talk about not taking gold from the pebble mine, but we're talking about getting, prohibiting this approach across the board. So that it's not just another community that they're going to go to and try to destroy later.
Not as far as I know. I don't think there's any international network of people who are trying to oppose the mines. The mines have their contacts and their governmental alliances everywhere, and that's what makes this so hard, because they're going into areas that are like the Pebble Project, very underpopulated, with populations that don't have the means, the knowledge, to know what the strategies might be to speak up. So if it weren't for the investors in the Renewable Resources Foundation, who I should share, are mostly conservative and very wealthy Republicans in the main cities. This is a very strange alliance, but nevertheless, they're the ones who are adamantly opposed to this mine because they love the natural environment and they want to see it preserved. They're not real big fans of the EPA, but they're really glad we have one now.
Yes, back here to my right.
This is for Mr. Kumara. I relate to your story very much, but I'm wondering, first of all, is Sri Lanka under either the protection or is it victimized by a trade agreement that the United States is party to? And then secondly, what is there in a practical way that we can ask how should we frame our ask for Sri Lanka? It seems like it's more dependent on grassroots kind of support, but I'm asking what we can ask.
Now, we are very proud of one thing, because we say even United States cannot defeat Al-Qaeda or Afghanistan guerrillas or whoever, but we defeated the most dangerous terrorist organization in the world, mainly on because of war victory. So the Sri Lankan government and also the US government, they are having certain agreements on war-related agreements. During the war, actually, Sri Lankan soldiers or let's say the officials were trained by US government. So that's one of the area that you are legitimizing the violations there. I mean, you are taking part when they invite, because every year now they are organizing a convention, inviting various people from the world to teach lessons that how war can be won. So every year they invite, and U.S. government are sending their officials to take part. You legitimize that. But the people who are working in the field, who are really involved in the field, are oppressed or suppressed by the same military after the war even. At the same time, now there is a resolution going on in Geneva, US-sponsored resolution on human rights council there. European Union, they totally cut off the GSP plus concessions, the tariff concessions for Sri Lanka because of the bad record of human rights violations of the country. But US is still continuing. So I don't know what's this hypocrisy. Because one way they are saying you should ensure the human rights, and GSP Plus is mainly giving the good record of human rights in a country, in a vulnerable countries. But Sri Lanka is not so. But they are giving that. I mean, that is one of the area that you all consider. Because maybe you are thinking that I'm from the country and you are talking against the country. Yes. It is not against the country, but to tell the government to restore the democracy, to ensure the human rights of the people who are working, who are living there. So that is the main thing. So in those two areas, in the war, I mean the military, at the same time the GSP Plus. So those are the two areas that you can consider.
Over here to the right.
My question is for Dr. Michael. Is your DVD available to people as a wonderful tool as to why people should become involved and informed about things going on?
Yes, in fact, even better, the Renewable Resources Foundation website has that one and 16 other short tapes. That if you just want to see the salmon, it'll explain the whole salmon cycle and the fry and how the whole ecosystem depends on there's just one on that for your science class. But if you want to do history, there's plenty of history there. There's 17 different short videos like that on the Renewable Resources webpage.
Over here to my left, yes.
My question is for Ms. Masarani. So for these, for example, highly populated crime-ridden communities where the restorative justice services have already been provided, has there been a way to translate this model to, for example, identify high-risk individuals or families or communities and provide these services in a preemptive manner before the irreversible crimes might be, committed?
A good question. In a preventative way. It is rather responsive, the restorative processes that I am most familiar with. But certainly, there are ways in which we can engage before things really become serious. One of the things that I'm working on right now is with schools. We get a lot of cases referred to us through the justice system that are incidents that originate in the school setting. So we're talking about young people who, maybe get in a fight at school or something and they end up getting arrested. The idea is to really get closer to the ground and closer to the community so that when a counselor or teacher sees they just seem to be, eyeballing each other in the classroom and they're beefing and they know something's going to happen, that's when they call. And so we've gotten a couple of referrals like that have, so we've been able to sit people down before an act of violence has occurred and really bring everybody together to figure out what's going on underneath. And in that way, these processes can be very preventative. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Over to my left. Oh, Asha.
Okay. This question springs from Ms. Wilson's comment about the Captain Phillips movie and the portrayal of Somalia in it. And I'm curious.
Hold your mic a little closer. Thank you.
I'm curious to how maybe each of your causes were portrayed in the media and if there was any misinterpretations or misrepresentations of what was actually occurring.
Popular venue. What have you say on that?
Sorry, we were discussing who should go first, and I was like, I actually didn't see that movie. It made me so upset when I saw the preview. I was like, that is not a good representation. And I think that happens a lot, especially with Somalia. I'll admit I'm a big TV watcher. So, I watch everything from like NCIS to, I don't know, Scandal. And often Somalia gets used as a country where there's terrorism going on. And so as I, really look at like American consumer media that talks about Somalia, and places within Africa as well, it's really damaging. And the fact that in our, even just, news media, whether it's, the New York Times or CNN, usually the coverage on Africa is death and destruction or reader. And so it's hard for people who even want to be educated about these issues to find the information. And so, you can go to, BBC or wherever else, other news outlets, but even with like allafrica.com, it's hard to find news from other places, especially if English is the language that you're looking for. But I do encourage people to look for other news sources, whether it's allafrica.com or IRIN, which also has news, especially from the United Nations, to just keep getting, IRIN. If you Google IRIN, it'll pop up. Or Relief Web. You kind of have to like do a little bit of Aikido to find the news that will give you real substance.
I think generally, we all see the news and we see the characterization of criminals, and that's something that's very pervasive, and that's a difficult thing to try to come up against and dispel. Really invoking this idea that there are no throwaway people. It flies in the face of all of these stereotypes, and that really is a difficult thing because it is the mainstream perception. I think that with the real growth of the prison industrial complex, and I think people are becoming more and more aware of this huge problem that's affecting our country, and especially communities of color and low-income communities, that it's important, that we really do need to show that there is a better way, because there is. The processes that we provide, these programs, don't just feel good, which they do, they're effective. The rates of compliance for our agreements are 90%. That includes restitution agreements for medical bills or car damage or whatever it is. When there's court-imposed restitution, it's 30%. And it's because when people come face to face with each other, that's a whole other level of accountability. So I think it really is sort of widening the scope. And there are a couple films out there that talk about restorative justice, talk about the prison problem, and I think that where we sit is at this incredible opportunity. These processes come out of Aboriginal cultures. Community conferencing is from Australia. It came to Baltimore City 14 years ago. It's been incredibly successful in an urban setting, but ultimately, like I said before, it's nothing new to humankind. It comes from cultures where you can't afford to throw people away. You need everybody to survive. And we've somehow forgotten that. I don't believe that it's not true anymore. I believe we've forgotten that. And so, that's...
Did either one of you want to comment? Yeah.
Just to echo, looking for your news, I mean, we haven't talked about this in any depth, but the news from Ukraine and Crimea and Russia is all, to me, a media event. I have relatives in Ukraine. My ancestors come from there. They call the Russians their brothers. Ukrainians speak Russian, and Russians speak Ukrainian if they live in Ukraine. The idea that there are whole parts of the country that speak one language and another part that doesn't is just nonsense. But that's the way it's been presented to us, to kind of build this up into some kind of international confrontation, when all the news I've gotten from my relatives over there is that there isn't any. Only our country is trying to make it into a big international fight. And where there isn't any violence or fight at all, why should we try to make it into one? So this is a case where, where there might be a spark, and it's only our country that's blowing on it to try to make it into a flame when nobody there wants that. And I must say, if I can add one point, I was really pleased to find so many Orthodox clergy out there standing between the two sides and saying, "Don't shoot," and they didn't, right?
Yep. If I just may make another comment, this is another best practice or recommendation. I would encourage all of you, especially with the young adults and the young people in your churches and groups, to really create a ministry of advocacy with film. That is to have focus groups whereby young people and adults can come together and talk about what they saw and what they didn't see. I know that this is a popular movement in parts of Indianapolis and Indiana with some of the churches, but I think it's a wonderful way to engage an intergenerational movement, particularly around advocacy issues, is to talk about these films and to talk about it ethically and around peace and justice issues. So, Michael, yeah.
Good morning. Just want to thank the panel for the amazing presentation. I was very motivated for what I hear today. First of all, because I'm Afro-Colombian, and so the story of the young Somalians is the story of the Afro-Colombians that have to join illegal armed forces just so that they can support their families. It's also the story of the people of Sri Lanka that have to fight progress for the to defend their territories. There's 5 million of Colombian people displaced for multinational corporations, and it's the story of the indigenous Alaskan people where we're fighting multinational gold mining corporations. And so, just hearing two positive stories touched my heart. I'm very thankful I'm here today. And so my question is, why do we continue? We all have clear who our enemy is. The communities know that multinational corporations are coming to their territories, to their ancestral territories, to profit from their land, from their gold, and from their water. And why we continue fighting these individual fights? That's my question. And then I wanted to also invite members of the panel that have been so successful in their fight to come to Colombia. Brother Michael, I really would like you to use your contacts and come in an airplane and visit these communities that are fighting multinational corporations, and you get some tan out of it. Thank you.
Wonderful. To the far right, your left.
Question for Holly. I really appreciate the things that you had to say about the restorative justice program, and I guess I'm wondering is how difficult is it to get the parties to come to an agreement such as you described today, and what happens when there isn't compliance?
Okay, so it's a voluntary process. Everyone's contacted. We do an extensive amount of preparation ahead of time. We call everybody ahead of time and have conversations with them about what's happened, where they're at. You know, we want to kind of get a temperature and also prepare them for the process, what to expect. So once we're there, while the conversation can feel hard, 95% of the time we reach an agreement. So people come with that intention. And even though it feels like sometimes you're on a wild bucking horse, by the end of it, they found their way to that agreement. And that's the hope for me as a practitioner. It's an amazing thing to witness. If then the points of the agreement are not complied with, we do monitor through compliance. It's really important that everyone walks in knowing that this is meaningful, right? So if something is broken, we contact the parties. It's a living document. It's created for them. So if something happens, someone misses a payment, something's not working, we say, well, what do you want to do? And if they want to revise the agreement, we have revised the agreement. If they've broken it in bad faith, and then there's the option to send it back, and that's what happens. We return the case to be processed normally.